The first thing people saw were the vans, white, unmarked, idling along a curb in downtown Los Angeles while the morning heat climbed and storefronts were still opening. A man in work boots stepped backward with his hands up. A woman screamed a name. Someone dropped a phone. Someone else started running. Within minutes, the sidewalks filled. Workers on break, shop owners, parents who recognized the look on their neighbors' faces. The look of people who know something is very wrong and moving fast. Federal agents poured into the block, weapons visible, voices sharp, movements rehearsed. What began as another weekday in the city turned into a standoff no one had voted for, no one had authorized, and no one could stop. For months, families across Southern California had lived with that fear humming in the background, the sense that normal life could be interrupted at any moment. Jobs, schools, churches, parking lots. But yesterday, that fear didn't stay quiet. It met the street. By midday, tear gas cut through the air as crowds surged forward, demanding answers that never came. People weren't just protesting arrests, they were reacting to the realization that law enforcement power, masked, federal, and distant, was being used without clear limits in their own neighborhoods. What mattered most wasn't politics. It was whether a parent would make it home, whether someone taken into a van would be allowed to call a family member, whether the Constitution still applied when uniforms arrived without warning. And that's when the cameras arrived.
First, we received a tip about ICE outside a Westlake Home Depot, then another raid at Ambience apparel store in LA's Fashion District. Happening around the same time at Ambience headquarters in downtown, people were put in handcuffs and loaded into white unmarked vans.
And that's where tensions escalated. Protesters confronted federal agents in the streets with tear gas being used to try to control the angry crowd.
And we begin our team coverage live in downtown LA with Eyewitness News reporter Carlos Granda, who was there. Hey, Carlos.
That's right. And this is where there was that big confrontation between protesters and federal agents. And it's all because of that major crackdown that was going on across several locations in Southern California this morning. Now, we are on Stanford Avenue in downtown Los Angeles. And, well, it all happened right in that white building that you see there on the left. This is where it got tense as agents moved in. Now, the raids this morning were here in this wholesale clothing business called Ambience. Federal agents were inside, and that's when a crowd formed outside, people surrounding the building. And after several hours, that's when more agents came in with armored vehicles and vans, and they moved in to disperse the crowd. As you said, there was pepper spray, confrontations, people screaming at the agents, and agents then moving in to keep a path open to move in several vans into the parking lot of the building. That's when agents took out those employees from inside, put them in that van, and tried to get them out of here. Now, that's what was going on the way out. People were following the agents. They were trying to stop them. They were yelling at them, throwing things at them. That's when we saw the agents throw out several loud flashbangs to move the crowd. Again, this is just one of several places targeted this morning. As you said, outside of Home Depot in the Westlake area, Homeland Security in the parking lot, and according to people there, about a dozen or so were arrested.
We ran because one of the persons said ICE in Spanish. So that's how basically the one that scattered, but the elderly people that were not able to run, those were the ones that got caught.
They just told me you have to get back. They kept pushing me back. And I assumed it was just those three agents. And then when I turn around, I see that there's a lot of them, just people running, screaming everywhere that ICE was here. They started detaining a couple of other people. There was only one agent that was nice enough to let one of the people that got arrested call their family members and let them know.
Now, we saw Homeland Security and FBI agents here. The FBI says that it is supporting our partners at the Department of Homeland Security in their immigration operations all over the country, and they say that was directed by the Attorney General. Reporting live from downtown Los Angeles, I'm Carlos Granda, ABC 7.
Those images spread quickly, not because they were unusual, but because they captured something people had been trying to articulate for months. A sense that force was outpacing accountability. That decisions affecting thousands of families were being executed on the ground by people who answered to no one the community could see. By late afternoon, the city wasn't just reacting to raids. It was reacting to the implications behind them. If elderly residents were being caught because they couldn't run fast enough, what counted as enforcement, and what crossed into something else entirely? That question didn't stay confined to the streets. It reached City Hall, it reached members of Congress, and it reached families who realized these moments weren't isolated mistakes, but part of a pattern that hadn't yet hit its breaking point. What happened next didn't come from a press release or a courtroom filing. It came from lawmakers who understood that silence, at this moment, carried its own cost. And the people inside those vans had no way of knowing how close the consequences for their captors might be, or how much was already shifting underneath the machinery that took them. By nightfall, the question had widened. What had happened on that block echoed across neighborhoods where people no longer distinguished between workdays and risk days. For months, accounts had piled up. Employees taken during shifts, parents missing at bedtime, communities forced to learn the routes of vans instead of bus schedules. What felt sudden on camera was, for many families, the latest chapter in an ongoing disruption of ordinary life. Local leaders began to speak less about single incidents and more about accumulation. When the same tactics appeared in parking lots, warehouses, and shopping districts, the meaning shifted. The city was not reacting to a chaotic morning. It was responding to the sense that something systematic had been normalized. That's when officials pointed to what hadn't happened. Explanations delivered in real time. Warrants made visible. Procedures communicated before force arrived. Instead, residents saw flashbangs. They saw armored vehicles. They watched crowds pushed back while people in handcuffs disappeared into vehicles without markings. The distance between enforcement and community widened in plain view. Behind closed doors, conversations turned to documentation. Videos cataloged, names recorded, timelines aligned. Lawmakers understood that the absence of clarity on the street would eventually become evidence somewhere else. And for those directing operations from afar, confidence had begun to look like overreach. What intensified matters was who confirmed involvement. When federal agencies acknowledged coordination and direction from higher offices, it reframed responsibility. Actions taken in Los Angeles were no longer isolated field decisions. They were part of an enforcement strategy that stretched beyond city limits and carried national implications. That shift altered the tone of the response. The language hardened. What began as concern for families became a debate about constitutional boundaries. Not abstractly, but in testimonies delivered by people whose lives had been reorganized overnight.
Individuals that work for Donald Trump believe that they're immune, that they're untouchable. But today, with this hearing led by the Oversight Committee, led by Ranking Member Garcia, we're telling them that you might think you're safe, but we're going to come after you. If you violated the law, threw somebody down, don't think it ends when Donald Trump is out of office. This will not end until we hold every single person that violated the Constitution and the rights of people in our communities accountable.
Those words mattered because they addressed a belief that had quietly shaped enforcement behavior, the idea that time would shield decisions made under political cover. But Los Angeles wasn't waiting. The city moved from reaction to compilation, from protest to record, and the process didn't revolve around speeches alone. Witnesses stepped forward. Some described being separated from spouses without explanation. Others spoke about workplaces effectively hollowed out after raids, leaving businesses scrambling and families without income. The emotional cost intertwined with economic strain, producing ripple effects that spread well beyond those detained. Local officials emphasized that fear itself had become an instrument. When people hesitated to report wage theft, unsafe conditions, or violent crime because of deportation worries, the entire city paid a price. Labor protections weakened, trust eroded, silence became a survival strategy, and that silence distorted public life. As this pattern came into focus, the stakes exceeded any single administration. The question shifted again. Once enforcement crossed into intimidation, how would democratic institutions respond? And who would determine whether constitutional guarantees had been suspended in practice while remaining intact on paper? The answer didn't arrive all at once. It assembled gradually, through hearings scheduled away from Washington, through testimonies gathered in the very neighborhoods affected, through public acknowledgement that enforcement power demanded public accountability. By the end of the day, the story had moved far beyond a confrontation downtown. It had become a test of whether abuses documented on sidewalks would be answered in chambers, and whether confidence inside unmarked vans would survive exposure under oath. What had begun with sirens and shouting was now progressing towards something slower, heavier, and far harder to deflect. The shift became undeniable the moment families were invited to speak into microphones instead of whispers. Not outside barricades, not while running from flashbangs, but in daylight, under oath, with cameras fixed and records kept. The chaos that had defined the raids was replaced by something federal power struggles to control: testimony. What unfolded next wasn't symbolic, it was procedural, documented, and public. The same neighborhoods that had been treated as enforcement zones were now being treated as sources of evidence. And the people most affected were no longer background figures in someone else's operation. They were witnesses.
New calls from local lawmakers to investigate possible civil rights violations by federal immigration enforcement agents. Welcome back. I'm Jory Rand in for Mark Brown.
I'm Michelle Fisher. This is Eyewitness News at 5:30. In the months since federal agents hit the streets of L.A. back in June, we have heard countless accusations of excessive force, profiling, and other unconstitutional acts.
We've seen a lot of videos as well. Today, Congressman Robert Garcia, along with L.A. Mayor Karen Bass, convened a congressional hearing to record testimony on the alleged violations. But first, they marched through downtown L.A. alongside local religious leaders, saying they will not remain silent. And as Eyewitness News political reporter Josh Haskell shows us, this hearing may be just the first step as they demand accountability from the federal government.
Get away here!
5 months after the ICE raids began in Los Angeles and continue to this day, congressional Democrats held a field hearing to bring accountability, help families locate their loved ones, and highlight what they call a majority of unlawful detentions by the Trump administration.
In this country, no one is above the law, and the Constitution protects everyone. The Constitution clearly states that due process is afforded to all people, not just U.S. citizens.
I think it's absolutely imperative that I stand up for the immigrants in our communities, whether it's mine or whether it's on the whole other side of the country. They need to know that we have their backs and that what you're seeing from the federal government is the worst of us. I need them to see the best of us.
In our city, we experienced an attack from our own federal government. That's the thing. I mean, I say it because it's so hard to believe.
During the hearing, members of Congress heard from local elected officials, immigrant rights organizations, and families who have had their lives turned upside down. This woman testified she hasn't seen her husband since June.
My kids cry going to sleep, asking for his father. I still don't know what's going to end, if he's going to be out or not. Is he going to spend Christmas with his family? I just want to let everybody know that we're here. We're not criminals. We're here for a better future for our family, for our kids.
The intention is to make people afraid, feel like they must choose between their safety and their jobs, leading to workforce vacancies that harm Los Angeles' economy and psyche.
Democrats on the committee conducting the hearings tell me they're confident they'll be successful in the 2026 midterms, allowing them to conduct investigations into the Trump administration's immigration enforcement operations.
We're going to be able to have the power to subpoena witnesses, bring people in, actually do something that has more power to it. We have also the string purses of the budget to be able to take areas and not fund those.
By establishing a record, Democrats on the committee say they can put policies in place to make sure the ICE raids never happen again. In downtown Los Angeles, Josh Haskell, ABC.
This was the turning point, not because words were said, but because power changed hands. The hearings transformed raids into records, vans into timelines, fear into sworn statements. For months, enforcement had relied on speed, confusion, and silence. Now it faced deliberation, documentation, and consequence. Each testimony narrowed the space between what happened on the street and what could be denied in Congress. Cause and effect finally aligned. Raids executed without transparency produced families living in limbo. That limbo hollowed out workplaces, destabilized neighborhoods, and eroded trust in institutions meant to protect public safety. When fear spread faster than information, democracy itself thinned, because participation requires security, not intimidation. And accountability doesn't arrive accidentally. It arrives because elected leaders choose visibility over avoidance, because oversight is exercised before memories fade, because budgets, subpoenas, and statutes exist precisely for moments when executive power drifts away from the people it claims to serve. What began with unmarked vans ended with a marked record. The families who testified didn't ask for spectacle. They asked for presence, for acknowledgement, for the basic assurance that the Constitution, spoken about so often, would be applied when it mattered most, not selectively, not politically, not only after elections. This is what responsible governance looks like: confronting damage instead of defending it, documenting harm instead of dismissing it, and ensuring enforcement answers to law, not the other way around. If the opening images showed what unrestrained power looks like, the closing ones showed the alternative: public, accountable, democratic. And now the choice is clear. Pay attention, share verified information, support leaders who believe rights don't disappear at zip codes or shift changes. Because safeguarding democracy doesn't start in Washington. It starts when communities refuse to let fear write the final chapter.